When my father passed away, I assumed the family estate would be split evenly. It was only fair. We had all been part of his life, all worked hard to carry on his legacy. Our family was far from perfect, but my father always encouraged unity. Yet, as we sat in the cold office of our family attorney, I realized just how deep the family's rifts ran. According to your father's will, the lawyer began, glancing at me and then the rest of the family. All assets, properties, and his business shares will be equally divided among. He paused, his gaze softening as he turned to me. Among everyone except Daniel. My heart dropped. I had never even considered the possibility of being excluded. My father had promised I'd have a stake in the family business since I was a child. My mother looked down, avoiding my eyes, and my younger brother Liam shifted in his seat, stifling a smirk. The only person who looked genuinely shocked was my sister Laura. Later, I tried to make sense of it all. Maybe this was some cruel mistake. But when I confronted my mother, she sighed and gave me a condescending smile. You were always the one who wanted to find your own path, Daniel. I thought you'd be happy to have one less responsibility. I knew there was more to it than that. My mother was never fond of my independence, but I'd never thought she'd stoop to this. As the days passed, anger boiled in me. My father would have wanted fairness, and if they weren't going to honor that, then maybe it was time they faced their own flaws. In the weeks that followed, I quietly investigated. I knew my family had secrets. Everyone does. But I didn't expect to find as much as I did. It started with Laura. She'd always been the quiet, responsible one, the good daughter. But when I looked deeper, I found that her well-mannered facade masked something darker. Laura had been secretly embezzling money from the family business for years. Her secret bank account showed transfers that didn't add up. Confronting her would be difficult, but I knew she'd have no choice but to listen. I cornered her one evening. "How do you explain these, Laura?" I said, handing her a printout of her transactions. Her face paled, but she quickly recovered. "Where did you get these? This is private." "Private? Like the family will? Tell me, how much did Mom and Liam know about this, or did they expect it all along?" Laura looked away, biting her lip. "Fine," she whispered. "But do you think exposing me will change anything? You're the one who's out of the will, remember?" What she said stung, but it only fueled my resolve. As I dug deeper, I discovered that my mother had quietly been siphoning off my father's assets into her own accounts after he'd gotten sick. She'd started transferring money months before he passed. As for my brother Liam, he'd been blackmailing one of my father's oldest business partners to secure a cushy role in the family business. I was furious, but I didn't lash out. Instead, I planned meticulously, timing everything. I wanted them all to feel exposed, just as I had. It was time for them to face the consequences of their selfishness. I decided to reveal everything at a family gathering my mother had organized, in honor of what would have been my father's birthday. It was the perfect setting, under the guise of remembrance. No one would see it coming. The atmosphere was thick with pretended warmth, every smile strained and forced. As we gathered around, I stood up, raising a glass. "Before we toast to Dad, there's something I want to share. A few things, actually," I said, locking eyes with each of them. Their eyes were wary, but they had no idea what was coming. "Laura," I started, and my sister looked at me, eyes widening with fear. "Do you want to tell everyone about your secret account, or should I?" She tried to laugh it off, but everyone looked at her with shock and confusion. I pulled out the transaction records, leaving them on the table for everyone to see. My mother gasped, and Laura turned pale. "And you, Liam," I continued, "your dirty little blackmail scheme. Did Dad know about it, or was that your way of making sure you got the job without earning it?" Liam's face flushed, and he tried to stammer out an excuse. But I wasn't done yet. Finally, I turned to my mother. "Mom, do you really think Dad would have wanted his assets drained behind his back? How much of his hard work did you manage to tuck away while he was dying?" The room was silent. Everyone stared aghast, and my mother's icy composure finally cracked. She looked at me, a mixture of hatred and fear in her eyes. "How dare you?" she hissed. "You think this little stunt will change anything?" But I was prepared. I'd recorded every discovery, with documents ready to be released. They wouldn't just face family shame. They'd face legal consequences too. My siblings and mother scrambled, each trying to deny, explain, and shift blame onto one another. I let them squabble, satisfied that they were finally feeling the weight of their actions. But as I stood there, I realized something. My anger had driven me to expose them, but it wouldn't give me back what I lost: my father's trust and legacy. The fallout was explosive. The media caught wind of the scandal, and soon, Every dirty secret my family had tried to bury was in the spotlight. The authorities were investigating Laura's embezzlement, Liam's blackmail scheme, and my mother's quiet siphoning of assets. The family's reputation, once pristine and respected, was dragged through the mud, and they had only themselves to blame. For the first time, they couldn't hide behind wealth and power. At first, I felt vindicated. I'd exposed the truth and watched them scramble under the weight of their lies. But as days turned to weeks, the satisfaction began to fade. There was an emptiness that lingered, a sense of loss that cut deeper than any betrayal. I'd shattered the only family I'd ever known, and while they'd wronged me, I couldn't shake the feeling that we could have been something better. One night, I received a call from Laura. She was desperate, her voice a fractured shell of the confident woman she once was. She asked if we could meet. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We met at a small cafe where she looked nothing like the polished, perfect sister I once knew. Her face was pale, and there were shadows under her eyes. "Daniel," she started, voice trembling, "I know you have no reason to listen to me, but I need you to understand. I did those things because I was afraid. I thought if I could control everything, if I could keep the family business afloat, I'd finally be good enough. But now," she swallowed, struggling to hold back tears, "I see the damage I've caused, and I don't know how to make it right." Her words stirred something in me, a faint flicker of sympathy. Laura had always been trapped by our father's expectations. The need to be the perfect daughter. I'd thought her betrayal was pure greed, but now I saw that it was born out of desperation. As we talked, I realized that, beneath it all, she'd never truly wanted the wealth or power. She'd wanted approval, something we'd all been chasing for years. We spent hours talking, and eventually, I saw a glimpse of the sister I'd grown up with. The one who had once been my ally. I decided to give her a chance at redemption, not for my sake, but for hers. Together, we agreed to work toward restoring some of the damage. Over the next few weeks, we arranged meetings with the family's former business partners, people my father had once trusted and respected. We admitted the truth, apologized, and made arrangements to repay the funds Laura had stolen. I took it upon myself to sell off parts of my father's estate, donating a large portion to charities he'd once supported. It was a painful decision, letting go of the family home and the pieces of his legacy, but it felt right. It was an act of cleansing, a way to let go of the past and move forward. Liam eventually reached out, his arrogance stripped away by the scandal. He'd lost his job, his reputation, and was facing legal consequences for his blackmail. At first, he'd been angry with me, blaming me for ruining the family. But as he watched our efforts to make amends, he softened. He confessed that he'd been caught in the same trap as Laura. A need to prove himself, to be worthy of our father's legacy. In a small act of humility, he offered to volunteer his time at one of the charities we'd supported. It wasn't much, but it was a start. As for my mother, she never apologized. Her pride kept her distant, and while I felt some regret, I knew I couldn't force her to change. Her actions had left a scar too deep to heal completely, and I came to accept that not everyone could be redeemed. Sometimes, justice meant letting go of those who refused to see their own faults. Months later, with the family business restructured and most of the debts repaid, Laura, Liam, and I decided to honor our father's name in a way he would have wanted. We created a foundation in his memory, focused on helping young entrepreneurs and students who faced financial hardship. It was a small legacy, far from the empire my father had built, but it was honest, rooted in something more genuine than wealth. In the end, I realized that exposing the truth hadn't just brought justice. It had given us a chance to rebuild, this time on a foundation of integrity. My family was forever changed, and we would bear the weight of our actions. But we had also found a path to redemption, one that wasn't about clinging to the past, but about moving forward and doing better. In letting go of the greed and lies, we'd created something that, finally, felt worthy of my father's name. Thanks so much for watching. I'd love to hear your thoughts about this story, and share your ideas for future videos. See you in the next video.